A new book just released, and it's taking a look at unexplained disappearances in Washington state.
The book is called Missing 411 Washington Centers, around a handful of disappearances in the wilderness, most notably at Mount Rainier and Olympic National Parks. And joining us to continue the conversation is David Paulides. David, good morning to you.
Good morning.
You are the director of the CanAm Missing Project. And before we dive into the cases specific to Washington state, talk with us about CanAm Missing Project and the Missing 411 book series and really the goal of the project here.
So CanAm Missing Project is located on YouTube, and we post videos every other day about people missing. And the profile that we've developed after 12 years of researching this fits a specific timeline of items that we've identified in the last 12 years. Namely, they bring canines to the scene. They can't find a scent. There's a weather event around the same time the person goes missing. We have what's called point of separation. Two people go into the woods and they decide to hike different trails. Something happens then, and one of the people will go missing. They bring professional trackers to the scene. They can't find tracks. And we've identified 64 cluster zones in North America where there's a series of people missing. Two of those cluster zones, Mount Rainier National Park and Olympic National Park.
Sounds like there's a lot of patterns when it comes to these unsolved cases. Missing 411 Washington is your 12th book on unexplained disappearances. Can you talk with us about some of the cases you highlight in the book?
Absolutely. Washington has some of the most unusual cases we've ever found. As an example, October 19th, 1973, a little boy named Jimmy Duffy went missing on Little Wenatchee Ridge at about 2:15 in the afternoon. And Jimmy was with his parents and his sister and a cat. And the cat and the sister and Jimmy were in the back of a camper sleeping while the husband and wife kind of walked the perimeter around the camper. They walked behind some trees about 150 yards away, and they heard a loud scream. They run from behind the trees, and the door to the back of the camper is open. Now, this is in a super remote area. Nobody else is around. They run up to the truck, and in the back, they see their daughter still asleep. And unbelievably, the cat was still asleep, and Jimmy's gone. The father's a hunter. He looks around. He sees no tracks in the dirt of his son. They search for an hour and a half. They call the sheriff's office. There's a search that goes on for 2 weeks. They find nothing. Jimmy was never found. They had brought canines to the scene. They had air support. It was one of those things that just makes no sense at all. In fact, the parents were given polygraphs because the police thought maybe that they killed their son. Both the parents passed polygraphs. They weren't involved. They didn't know where their son was.
Wow. Well, we don't have answers, specifically in that case, still searching for those. We know that there's many cases of people getting lost in the wilderness. What goes into those searches in the wilderness? And do you think efforts by first responders need to change in order to solve more of these cases?
So the standard protocol would be you bring canines to the scene, you give them a scent trail to follow, and the dogs go down and they find the people. This happens the vast, vast majority of the time. Our cases are a very small subset of a normal case. And in fact, they're not normal at all because canines do work. And when you bring in hundreds and hundreds of searchers, they walk shoulder to shoulder, they should find the person. In fact, a small child like Jimmy should have been found within 2 miles of that point he was last seen, and he wasn't. The reality is these cases are highly unusual. No tracks, no scent trail. There's a big whodunit there. And of course, the detectives turn to the parents thinking they're involved, and they weren't.
Is there anything specific about Mount Rainier or Olympic National Park here in Washington that you're seeing when it comes to some of these disappearances?
Very famous case on Mount Rainier involving two men, a man named Chris Hartonis, who was 40, and Raymond Vakili, who was 48. And they were two of the most experienced men in the world climbing an area called Camp Muir in the Muir Snowfield. And in November 5th, 99, they took off, and there were three of them. There was another man with them, and about halfway, this other man said, well, I'm going to turn around. I'm getting too tired. I don't feel right. Again, that's point of separation. Well, Vakili and Hartonis carried on, and they disappeared in an area where they shouldn't have disappeared. And in fact, The National Park Service came out and made statements at the time that it was a mystery to them how two of the most experienced climbers that were cautious, they didn't make rash decisions, and they were super experienced on the Muir snowfield, could disappear and not be found. That was made 6 months after they disappeared. It's now been 25 years later, and their sleds that they were towing, none of their backpacks, none were ever found. And as far as Rainier goes, there's over a dozen cases that don't involve climbers. And Hartonis and Vikili weren't doing a technical climb. They were dragging sleds through the snow and they disappeared. And to think that a huge sled, two of them, have never been found, it's not normal.
Thank you so much, David, for going into detail on some of these cases. And you're doing some important work for sure, bringing light to some of these cases.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and in case you missed it on the graphic there, nabigfootsearch.com if you want to check out his book. Some really interesting research, and these are cases that span several decades in some cases, and just want some answers.
Yeah.
You know, there's some mysteries out there, and if you have any information, come forward and maybe help out with those.